This video is brought to you by Incogn. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they are providing to the entire upper echelon community. Where do you even begin when talking about Epstein? Do you start at the beginning, when he got a job at the prestigious New York Dalton School despite having zero qualifications? Does it matter that the headmaster responsible for hiring him was Donald Barr, father of William Barr, who was the subsequent Attorney General of the United States of America for the Trump administration in its first term? Would people care that he walked around the school wearing fur coats and gold chains, flirting with young girls like a stereotypical pimp? Or is the collective attention span of society now so short that people have all but forgotten? It's a rhetorical question, to be quite frank, because the story of Jeffrey Epstein is the story of money, power, politics, and drama, which are collectively the most addictive concepts in human history. A little over a week ago, I made a video called The Epstein Disaster of 2025, which reviewed a troubling situation where the United States government, namely the current administration of Donald Trump, appeared to be mishandling the Epstein file publication, or lack thereof. The focus of that video, which I'll link down below obviously, was inconsistency. High-ranking officials like the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, or Deputy Director Dan Bongino, signaling before their implementation to these roles that the Epstein story was a top priority. Statements by Attorney General Pam Bondi about how the Epstein list was physically on her desk, with a highly publicized Phase 1 release occurring right in front of the White House, actually. Jokes made on podcasts by Vice President J.D. Vance saying, quote, "We need to release the Epstein list," or even more importantly, Trump's own explicit statements that if elected, he would release the list of clients and all surrounding files on Jeffrey Epstein. Except, spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Instead of declassified files, bombshell revelations, or justice of any kind, we got a cover-up, a massive one. And as that cover-up continues to implode, I want to take some time here and showcase a bird's-eye view of who, what, when, where, and why. Let's get to it. The story of Jeffrey Epstein on the most basic level is widely known. Private island, private plane, powerful friends, and horrible crimes. But far less scrutinized, at least by a certain demographic of people until recently, was his relationship with Donald Trump. It turns out Epstein and Trump go way back as friends. They've been filmed together at parties. There's audio of Epstein claiming to be Trump's, quote, closest friend for 10 years. Trump himself has said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy." And much more recently, as per exclusive reporting from the Wall Street Journal, a supposed birthday letter has been revealed in which Trump and Epstein correspond together, with Trump allegedly saying, quote, "We have certain things in common, Jeffrey." Later adding, "A pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret," end quote. I think it's worth mentioning that Trump is now already threatening to sue the Wall Street Journal for publishing that story, calling it a disgusting and filthy rag, obviously unfamiliar with the Streisand effect. But the horribly unpleasant reality we are all faced with is that Jeffrey Epstein was integrated at every conceivable level in the most powerful circles on Earth with a spiderweb of connections that are completely impossible to ignore. Online browsing is now basically ubiquitously associated with the concept of data harvesting, where the websites you visit and the services you use harvest insane amounts of information about you and then sell it for profit. Practically every single technology company in the world does this now, and you can't really stop them. However, one thing that you can do is curb the spread of that data whenever possible. You see no benefit from companies keeping and selling your information, aside from maybe customized advertisements, but that's not even a benefit, it's a nuisance. So for anyone who wants to cut back on the number of places where your data is stored, sold, and displayed, which can result in spam phone calls, text messages, and junk mail, among many other dangers, Incogn is here to help. It's a pretty simple process. Sign up for the website, give them legal permission to work on your behalf, and let them know the specifics of what they'll be having removed. After that, going down their list, they contact data brokers, of which there are hundreds, and they get your information deleted. However, since they're always improving the service, they now have an extra feature. Everyone's probably Googled their names before at one point or another, but if you find your information on a website where it shouldn't be, you can submit the URL to Incogn, and they'll attempt to get the info taken down for you. To be clear, this is in addition to the normal services of removing your data from brokers. And while it's certainly possible to go through this process yourself, contacting the legal departments for these companies and then fighting objections or actually getting them to take things down can be an incredibly difficult process. Incogn now offers you the option of finding where your information is displayed and then submitting the link to them, after which they execute that difficult process and get your data removed. For a content creator like me, that is an invaluable service. Using the link down below in the description and code Echelon at checkout, you can get 60% off an annual subscription to Incogn. Again, link down below and promo code Echelon for 60% off your subscription. Big thank you to Incogn for sponsoring the channel. Okay, time for the info dump. In 2002, speaking to New York Magazine, Donald Trump, referring to Jeffrey Epstein, said, quote, "He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life," end quote. But then 2 short years later, in 2004, the pair had a falling out with one another, owing to a real estate deal. The gist of it is that they were each trying to purchase a particular mansion called Maison de l'Amitié, which ironically means a house of friendship in French, during which they aggressively outbid each other and undercut their competitor deliberately. Trustee on the case, Joseph Lazinski, recalls the two saying things like, quote, "You don't want to do deals with him. He doesn't have the money," end quote. Donald Trump eventually came out ahead in that competition, paying over $41 million for the property, but the damage seemed to be done, and the two would never really appear to be close again after that. Donald Trump would later go on to sell the mansion, just 4 years later, to a Russian billionaire named Dmitry Rybolovlev through a shell company called Country Road Property LLC, which is a whole separate thing that I have a multitude of questions about. But the main point is that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein appear to have ended their long-standing and close friendship over real estate in 2004. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because shortly after this, in 2005, Jeffrey Epstein faced his first round of criminal trafficking and conspiracy charges in the Southern District of New York. This is hypercritical because that first round of charges, including the specific allegation that the girls were being trafficked to other powerful individuals, not just Epstein, with over 30 victimized young girls already in 2005, ended with what can really only be described as a sweetheart plea deal. Under the supervision of Alex Acosta, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, Epstein was allowed to plead out of federal court, gaining immunity for himself and his co-conspirators, then serving just 13 months in county jail, which is nothing compared to what it would have been at a federal level. Except the real icing on the cake is that when the house of cards came finally tumbling down all around him, all the way in 2020, it was found that this sweetheart plea deal was illegal. Alex Acosta broke the law in favor of Jeffrey Epstein. Want to know the kicker? Alex Acosta, after this deal took place, well after it, was appointed as Secretary of Labor in the first term of President Trump. Oh, and when speaking about the Epstein case before selection, according to the Daily Beast, he said, quote, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone," end quote. Let's just get this part fully straight. The guy who cut Epstein loose, effectively, deliberately under-prosecuting him and his co-conspirators and shielding everyone involved from federal charges, broke the law when he did that, and then claimed that Epstein was an intelligence asset publicly, after which he gets an appointed position in the first Trump administration. That's kinda strange, isn't it? Rhetorical, again, because yes, it is, but we're not even remotely close to being done. In 2007, although the documents were never made public until much, much later, a woman named Virginia Guthrie was approached by law enforcement, both American and Australian, after being identified as one of Epstein's victims. Guthrie would go on to be the tip of the spear, basically, when it came to the fall of Epstein, and her bravery should be forever recognized, I think. But there's a key factor here in how she came to be abused in the first place that honestly can't be overlooked. Virginia Guthrie was recruited and groomed by Ghislaine Maxwell at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. 16 at the time, she was working there as a spa attendant, only to get swept up in the horrifying world of Epstein and become the victim of many powerful men. Speaking with the BBC in 2019, she said, quote, "I couldn't comprehend how in the highest levels in the government, powerful people were allowing this to happen. Not only allowing it to happen, but participating in it," end quote. Once again reaffirming, just like the original indictment from 2005 all the way back then, that Epstein was running a full-scale operation which catered to the rich and powerful. Flash forward to 2016 and we get this right here. Jane Doe versus Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Jane Doe is actually a woman named Katie Johnson, and I won't be quoting this document at all because the contents are incredibly graphic, but this previous lawsuit alleges horrible, horrible things against Donald Trump. The interesting part, however, is that the case was dropped and refiled multiple separate times, adding more and more witnesses in between those filings. But I do want to make it clear that eventually the case was withdrawn voluntarily. However, I also think it should be made clear that this came following significant threats against Katie Johnson, which caused her to abruptly retract from the public eye as much as she could, and may have contributed to why the case ultimately disappeared. Trump's legal team adamantly maintains to this day that nothing said in the lawsuit was ever true, and that the entire thing was a complete fabrication. Still, the spiderweb of connections, inconsistencies, and troubling coincidences only ever gets bigger when it comes to Epstein. July 2019, that's when shit really hits the fan. Finally, 14 years overdue, in fact, federal charges collide with Jeffrey Epstein, and the fallout begins immediately. Alex Acosta, the one who cut him the initial illegal plea deal, is quickly forced to resign in shame. The power and political circles around the world begin turning their heads. But 1 month later, he's dead, and the number of questions surrounding how are immeasurable. Frankly, I couldn't possibly fit every single discrepancy or contradiction in a single YouTube video. The amount of things wrong on this honestly can't be explained. They just can't. But here's some bullet points. The initial Office of the Inspector General report openly states that right before Epstein died, as in a matter of hours, he was given an unmonitored phone call for 20 minutes with his mother. Except his mother had been dead for 15 years. Yeah, right before his death, Jeffrey Epstein had a protocol-breaking 20-minute secret conversation with someone in Belarus after telling the guards it was his mom. Want the video footage? No, accidentally deleted because of a technical problem. Guards monitoring prisoners, should we expect that? No. They fell asleep, then falsified reports to make it seem like someone had been checking on him, and he was on suicide watch and left alone, and his cellmate was transferred out, and a whole huge number of things. And with numerous other conflicts all over the place, errors and violations, unimaginable amounts, the idea that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself became widely disputed. In the aftermath, Wired magazine published data on the cell phones that had visited the island, hundreds of them, extensive amounts of data actually, indicating that with proper resources, this type of high-level operation could absolutely be investigated further, right? Like, easily. Another of Epstein's victims came forward, speaking to CBS News this time, and claimed that his properties had extensive video surveillance inside them, including pinhole cameras in practically every room. Quote, "The main thing he did when I walked in, and I thought was interesting, he showed me where the cameras, the men monitoring everything, were. So if you're facing the house, there's a window on the right that's barred. That's the media room, is what he called it. And so there was a door that looked like an invisible door with all this limestone and everything, and you push it and you go in. And I saw all the cameras. It was like old televisions, basically, like stacked. They were monitors inside this cabinet, and there were men sitting there. And I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. I'm like, I am never going to use the restroom here, and I'm never going to sleep here. You know what I mean? It was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments." End quote. Combining the previous charges from 2005, combining the accusations with witness testimony like we just discussed, and considering the fact that Epstein owned his own private island, multiple other properties as well, with his own private plane flying between them, where hundreds of the world's most powerful businessmen, politicians, and celebrities would frequently go, it became abundantly obvious to the entire world that the corruption didn't stop with Epstein. It went deeper than that. Well, that's not what they're telling you to believe now. As of July 2025, a joint Department of Justice FBI memo was released stating that the case was closed and there was nothing more to see. But in the background, this is probably a crass way to put it, but the levees broke. Trump's voter base are not buying it, not in the slightest, which only infuriates him further, obviously, and his critics have open season on demanding disclosure for a bipartisan issue of obvious corruption, to which, it seems, he is now the only barrier. Here's an example of what I'm talking about, okay? Author Michael Wolff, who previously published multiple books highly critical of the Trump administration, has now claimed to the Daily Beast in an article titled "Trump Held Talks on Pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell," quote, "They did everything together, and this is from sharing, pursuing women, hunting women, sharing at least one girlfriend for at least a year, and this kind of rich guy relationship with each other's planes," end quote. And this type of claim in a vacuum would be fairly easy to ignore, but none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? A disgruntled author or a critical author or somebody who is an enemy of the current administration saying something like this by itself off in the distance, that really wouldn't matter. But let's focus on the word planes. Look at this post. This is Donald Trump, Truth Social 2024. Quote, This is what the Democrats do to their Republican opponent who is leading them by a lot in the polls. This is AI, and it is very dangerous for our country. Also, I was never on Epstein's plane or at his stupid island. Strong laws ought to be developed against AI. It will be a big and very dangerous problem in the future. End quote. Just read that again. I was never on Epstein's plane. That is a lie. As part of Maxwell versus the United States, Ghislaine Maxwell being the woman that Trump allegedly considered pardoning, according to the author Michael Wolff, and Epstein's co-conspirator who helped traffic young women. As part of her trial, we actually got to see the flight logs. There's a lot of stuff that got released already, but tucked away inside the documents, we can see that Donald Trump flew on Epstein's plane 7 separate times across the span of just a couple years. One such flight was literally only him and Epstein, no one else, and yet he is lying to the world with claims that he never flew on the plane. Just a couple of years ago, practically everyone in his current administration, director of the FBI, attorney general, counselor to the president, the vice president, and his own sons, were vocally demanding the release of the Epstein files promptly. But now, suddenly, they want you all to stop talking about it. As part of this cover-up, which is really the only accurate word to describe it now, the administration released almost 11 hours of jail footage, but the footage doesn't match the initial OIG report. A Wired investigation first discovered that the footage had been altered using Adobe Premiere Pro editing footage, and then discovered that it wasn't just 1 minute that was missing, it was 3 minutes that were cut out. The claim was that they had given us raw surveillance footage, but when you feed something into an editing program, cut 3 minutes out of it, and then badly stitch it back together, that's not raw footage. That's a cover-up. Want more? Okay, that's easy. Turns out that right about the same time that they launched this sort of ridiculous denial campaign, the State Department was also dismantling the team that combats human trafficking. And sure, that's a pre-planned initiative on its own timeline. But what about this? What do you call it when the president, who was close friends with the convicted trafficker and then lied about flying on his plane, fires the prosecutor of Ghislaine Maxwell's case, right as the world starts thinking, wait a second, you're definitely lying to us about Epstein? They abruptly fire the prosecutor who helped convict the co-conspirator. It really honestly never ends. Sitting in the White House during a cabinet meeting, Trump steps in when Pam Bondi was asked about the Epstein situation, and he says, "Do you even want to answer that?" calling it a waste of time, and then proceeded to talk about what kind of gold paint to use on the molding in the room. Speaking to the press, Trump now claims that the Epstein files were, quote, made up by Comey, Obama, and Biden, even though his second arrest and subsequent death happened during and under Trump's first presidential administration. Listen to this one, because there's a lot of them, okay? Like, he's not shutting up about it. And then we're going to talk about yet another connection. Here it is.
I know you've urged people to move on, but I'm curious, why do you think your supporters in particular have been so interested in the Epstein story and so upset about how it's been handled?
I don't understand it. Why they would be so interested. He's dead for a long time, but I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think, well, really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going.
So first of all, power, politics, money, crime, and sex. The richest and most powerful people on the planet wrapped up in all of those things simultaneously. And Trump calls it boring. That's a choice. But this guy right here, laughing as he says it, that's Howard Lutnick. He used to be Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor. See, the cover-up doesn't work if you do it so badly that the entire world can see clearly. But for a political movement that operates on the principle of blind loyalty, having people ask questions of you rather than your opponents only is frightening. Look at this. This is a Truth Social post from Donald Trump, which has now been deleted, by the way, which reads, quote, "The radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again." Further down, "Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax, and my past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker." And then lastly, quote again, "I have had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history, and all these people want to talk about, with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems, is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let the weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success because I don't want their support anymore." End quote. That is a meltdown. It's a meltdown because practically his entire administration, even his family, advocated for and promised something which, for some unknown reason, he now doesn't want to show us. We've cycled through multiple separate tactics in record time. First, release the files. We demand you release the files. But that pretty quickly became some sort of bogus PR stunt ploy. We're releasing the files, but it's actually less than was publicly available for a decade. When that failed, suddenly the files don't exist. There's nothing to pursue. The case is closed. Stop caring about this. And finally, when people refuse to stop caring, okay, fine, there's files, but the Democrats made them up. It's a hoax. You're an idiot if you fall for it, and I don't want your support. That's where we're at currently. We want this thing, never mind. That thing doesn't exist. Fine, yes, it does exist. It's a hoax. The 5 stages of cover-up, let's call them. I'll leave you with this. The most recent substantial development is that GOP members have now blocked a Senate resolution to release the files. But the sad, unending truth is that the spiderweb of corruption is so intricate and so large, neither party is innocent, not by a long shot. Epstein was connected at the highest levels of government and financial power across the entire world, even as far as the royal family in England. But for the sake of simplicity, here it is. Epstein was arrested and basically let go in 2005. The man who helped make that happen went on to work in Trump's first-term administration. During the end of that term, Epstein was arrested and died, which meant that the primary investigation and buildup all happened under Trump. Trump used to be friends with him, best friends according to one, a great guy according to the other, allegedly weighed pardoning his co-conspirator, used the same lawyer as Epstein, Alan Dershowitz, who also represented figures like O.J. Simpson and Harvey Weinstein, and he has flatly lied about flying on Epstein's plane. His name appears in Epstein's little black book, which is a contact list, not so much a client list. I talked about that in the first video I did. But that little black book only appeared after a man named Alfredo Rodriguez attempted to sell it to the press. One of the things he allegedly also did was to circle the names of people closely connected, the ones who would bring down the empire if they got caught. And Donald Trump's name, which appears with 12 different phone numbers attached to it, is circled. I don't personally believe that there's like a literal physical documented list of who did what, when, and how much, but the same way Wired magazine can find out cell phone tracking data and cross-reference that with the names of people who flew to the island, the FBI and the DOJ could certainly pursue the ones that are closely connected to Epstein instead of openly telling the world, just look the other way. At the end of the day, this is a cover-up. It's not a hoax, it is not boring, not by any stretch, and it certainly isn't going to just disappear because Trump tells the world to forget about it. And that, I think, is what truly, really terrifies him. People that support Trump have a level of blind loyalty that is almost unshakable, emphasis on the word almost, to a point where he bragged about walking down Fifth Avenue, shooting someone, and still enjoying support afterward. But one of the final unimpeachable issues that people still care about is the type of evil that Jeffrey Epstein fully represents, which has turned this case into just a total lightning rod. The Epstein cover-up has rapidly become Trump's nightmare. That's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. The video sponsor, of course, locals and Patreon, monthly memberships. That's the best way by far. A special VPN deal, merchandise, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.